Claire Matthews had lived in her Portland home for over 20 years, but lately it felt more like a waiting room than a home. She was 49, graceful yet tired, with a heart that had slowly learned to hide its loneliness behind quiet smiles and polite conversations. Her husband, Robert, was often away for work, sometimes for weeks. Their phone calls were short and practical about bills, groceries, or his next flight. Her children, both grown and busy, rarely visited except on holidays. Most days, Claire spoke more to her coffee cup than to another person. That Tuesday morning began like every other. The sky hung low with soft gray clouds, and a light drizzle misted her garden. Claire stood by the window, holding her warm mug, staring at the quiet street. The world outside looked alive, but her own life felt paused. Then came the knock, firm, sudden, and unfamiliar. She set her cup down and went to the door. When she opened it, she found a young man standing there, rain dripping from the brim of his cap. He was tall, early 20s, with a polite smile that seemed to carry sunshine through the fog. "Delivery for Mrs. Matthews," he said, handing her a medium-sized box. His tone was gentle, almost respectful, as if he understood the stillness inside that house. Claire smiled faintly, surprised by his warmth. "Thank you," she said, signing the slip. "No problem," he replied. "You have a good day?" As he turned to leave, she noticed the name tag on his jacket, Ethan Carter. Simple name, but something about it stayed in her mind long after the door closed. She didn't understand why. Maybe because it had been a long time since someone had spoken to her like that, kindly. Without rush, without obligation. The next week she received another delivery, a small box this time. Same knock. Same voice. "Good morning, Mrs. Matthews." His smile was genuine, the kind that made even a gray morning feel lighter. They exchanged small talk about the weather, the rain that never seemed to stop, and the smell of fresh coffee drifting from her porch. He was easy to talk to, the kind of person who made silence feel comfortable. Claire didn't realize how much she had missed the simple act of being seen, of being listened to. Most of her days were quiet, filled with work emails and half-watched TV shows. But that morning after he left, she caught herself smiling. A real smile. She didn't know it, but something small had shifted inside her. A few days later, another package arrived. This time, Ethan looked more relaxed, less like a stranger and more like a familiar face. "You get a lot of deliveries," he joked lightly. Claire laughed softly. "Maybe it's my way of pretending someone remembers I exist." He grinned. "Well, I remember you now." It was an innocent line, but it lingered in her heart longer than it should have. Over the next few weeks, his visits became more frequent. Sometimes he brought the mail, sometimes just a wave from the truck. He always found something kind to say, a compliment about her garden, a comment on her dog's playful bark, or a question about the book she was reading. Their conversations were short but sincere, and each time he left, Claire felt the quietness of her home a little more sharply. It wasn't attraction at first, it was comfort. She had spent so long feeling invisible that Ethan's attention felt like a forgotten warmth returning. His youth reminded her of a version of herself she had lost years ago, hopeful, curious, alive. She didn't dare read too much into it. Yet she couldn't ignore how her heart felt lighter after he left. One afternoon, it began to rain hard. The sky darkened early, and thunder rolled softly in the distance. Claire was making tea when she heard the familiar knock again. When she opened the door, Ethan stood there, soaked to the bone, holding another brown box. "Sorry about the weather," he said with a half-laugh. "This city really doesn't take a break." She noticed his hair plastered to his forehead, water dripping from his jacket. "You'll catch a cold out there," she said. "Wait, come in for a minute. At least dry off." He hesitated, but nodded. Just for a second. He stepped inside. Wiping his hands on a napkin, she handed him. The house smelled of lemon and tea. He looked around politely, his gaze landing on the family photos on the wall, her kids as toddlers, her wedding picture, the backyard in summer. "You have a beautiful home," he said softly. "Thank you," she replied, then added, "It's quieter than it used to be." He smiled faintly. "Quiet's not always bad." They talked for a few minutes, Nothing deep, just easy words that filled the air like soft background music. Then he left, thanking her again for the towel. When the door closed, Claire stood still for a long moment. Her heart was beating faster than usual. Not out of excitement, but out of something she hadn't felt in years: being noticed, being heard, being alive. That night, she found herself thinking about his smile, the way he listened, and how kind his eyes had been. She shook the thought away, telling herself it was just harmless friendliness. But even as she tried to sleep, the sound of that knock replayed in her mind. The next few days, she caught herself glancing at the clock around the time he usually came by. Sometimes he didn't. Sometimes he did. And each time she heard that knock again, her heart skipped, not out of love, but from a longing she didn't want to name. Claire had been faithful all her life, loyal, devoted, predictable. Yet something in her heart was quietly changing. It wasn't desire in a wrong way. It was awakening. After years of emotional distance, she was simply feeling again warmth, curiosity, connection. Ethan, on his side, remained polite, careful, never crossing a line. He asked questions about her garden, her hobbies, her favorite places to eat. Once he mentioned missing his mom, who had passed away 2 years ago. Claire listened with gentle empathy. Their conversations felt natural, like two lonely hearts finding company in small moments. And yet every time he left, the silence grew heavier. Claire began to see the contrast, how alive she felt for those few minutes and how empty her house seemed afterward. She started questioning her life, not her marriage, exactly, but the woman she had become inside it. Then one morning, while watering the plants, she noticed Ethan's truck parked outside again. She smiled automatically, a reflex she didn't even recognize anymore. As he walked up the steps, their eyes met, and for a brief second, neither of them spoke. "Good morning," he said finally, voice soft. "Morning," she replied. Her smile, gentle but uncertain. He hesitated, then said quietly, "You ever get tired of being alone all day?" The question hit her harder than she expected. She froze for a moment, the words echoing in the quiet air. She wanted to laugh it off, but she couldn't, because the truth was, yes, she did get tired. Every single day. But she wasn't sure she should say it out loud. So she just smiled instead, pretending his question hadn't reached the part of her heart that ached the most. That night, she sat by the window again, watching the rain fall, thinking about that question. Do you ever get tired of being alone? For the first time in years, she didn't have an easy answer. And somewhere deep inside, she knew this was only the beginning of something that would change everything. After that quiet, thoughtful question, Claire found it hard to stop thinking about Ethan. His words echoed in her mind for days. Do you ever get tired of being alone all day? It wasn't meant to be deep, but it had reached a place she rarely let anyone touch. For years, she had buried her feelings under routines, watering plants, sorting mail, and pretending silence didn't bother her. But now, one young delivery man's kindness had stirred the stillness. Ethan started showing up more often, sometimes with packages, other times just with a friendly wave or a small conversation by the gate. Claire told herself it was harmless, just simple human connection. But she couldn't deny that her heart felt lighter when she saw him walking up the steps. One morning, the sun finally broke through the Oregon clouds. Claire was trimming the roses when Ethan stopped his van and walked over, holding a coffee cup. "You mentioned you liked this blend," he said, smiling. "I thought I'd bring you one." She blinked, surprised. "You remembered?" "Of course," he said easily. "You're one of my favorite stops." The warmth in his tone made her cheeks flush slightly, though she quickly looked away. "Thank you, Ethan. That's really thoughtful." They stood by the garden sipping coffee and talking about small things. The city's unpredictable weather, its long delivery routes, her favorite books. He had a quiet humor, a calmness that made her feel at ease. There was no rush, no pressure. Just two people talking like they'd known each other for years. As the days passed, their conversations grew longer. Sometimes she'd wait on the porch, pretending to check her mail. Sometimes he'd slow his truck near her house just to wave. He told her about his life, how he'd moved from Seattle after his mother's passing, how he was saving up to open a small coffee shop someday. Claire listened, genuinely interested. She hadn't felt this connected to anyone in a long time. In return, she told him about her painting, a hobby she had once loved but abandoned after life got too busy. Ethan encouraged her to start again. "You should," he said one afternoon. "You talk about it like it used to make you happy. Maybe it still can." That night, Claire dug through the closet and found her old paintbrushes and half-used canvases. The next morning, the smell of acrylic filled the house, and for the first time in years, color replaced the silence. She even texted a picture of her painting to her daughter, who replied, "Wow, Mom, it's beautiful. I'm proud of you." It was a small moment, but it mattered. Ethan's presence became like sunlight through a window, not blinding, but gentle and steady. He never flirted or crossed any lines. He just listened, laughed, and encouraged her. But deep down, something emotional was forming, not an affair, but a connection that neither of them planned. One rainy afternoon, Claire was sitting on the porch, wrapped in a blanket, watching the raindrops slide down the railings. She didn't expect anyone to come by. But then she saw Ethan's truck slow down near her driveway. He stepped out, holding a brown box, his jacket soaked. "You're sitting in the rain again?" he said with a teasing grin. "I like it," she replied. "It makes me feel less alone." He nodded and sat on the step below her, careful not to get the porch too wet. "I get that," he said. "When my mom passed, I used to sit outside during storms. I think I just wanted to hear something louder than my own thoughts." Claire looked at him, her heart softening. "You must miss her a lot." "Ade," he said quietly, "but I try to keep going. Meeting people like you helps. People like me." She asked with a small smile. He looked up, eyes gentle. "Kind people. People who listen." The rain kept falling, but neither of them moved. For that moment, age, time, and difference disappeared. They were just two lonely souls sharing warmth on a cold afternoon after he left. Claire sat for a long time, staring at the gray sky. She didn't know what this connection meant, but it made her feel alive again, not in a romantic fantasy, but in a deeply human way. She realized she had stopped expecting anyone to care, and yet here was someone who did, even if just through small acts of kindness. The next few weeks passed like chapters in a quiet book. Ethan would bring her coffee sometimes, or help carry a heavy box inside. Once he fixed the loose hinge on her front gate. She baked him cookies as thanks, which he accepted with that same easy smile. There was nothing inappropriate between them, just a growing warmth that both of them silently understood but never spoke about. Then one day, Claire received a call from Robert. He was away on another business trip, as always. But his voice was distant, distracted, like he was calling out of duty rather than love. "Everything fine at home?" he asked. "Everything's fine," she said. But the words felt empty. When she hung up, she realized how little they had shared in months. Robert was her husband, but he had stopped being her companion long ago. Later that evening, Ethan came by again, dropping off a small package. "You okay?" he asked softly, noticing her expression. She nodded. "Just tired, I guess." He didn't push. He simply said, "You should rest. You do too much thinking." His concern made her eyes sting with unexpected tears. She quickly wiped them away, embarrassed. "Sorry, I don't know why I'm like this lately." Ethan smiled gently. "You don't have to apologize for feeling." That sentence stayed with her. It had been years since anyone had said something so understanding to her. She had spent so long pretending to be fine that she had forgotten how it felt to be seen. Really seen. In the following days, she started noticing small details, how her house didn't feel as heavy anymore, how the morning light through the window felt softer, how she was beginning to smile without realizing it. Ethan had brought back something she thought was gone forever, warmth in her heart. But part of her also began to worry. She knew how delicate this was, how easily a simple friendship could be misunderstood. She didn't want to cross a line, didn't want to turn something pure into something complicated. Still, When he wasn't around, she missed his laughter and the easy way he made her feel young again. She missed his stories, his kindness. The way he noticed things no one else did. One evening, as she painted, she found herself sketching a silhouette, a man holding a delivery box, smiling. She laughed softly at her own foolishness, but couldn't bring herself to paint over it the next morning. She placed the painting near the window where the light hit it perfectly. It wasn't about Ethan anymore. It was about what he had given her, the courage to feel again. A few days later, he arrived looking tired but cheerful. "Long day?" she asked. "Yeah," he said, rubbing his neck. "But this stop always makes it better." It was a simple line, but her heart skipped. She smiled back, quietly grateful. They talked for a while before he left, and as his truck drove away, Claire realized something. Whatever this was, friendship, fate, or just a brief moment of connection, it had reminded her of something she'd forgotten. She was still capable of feeling joy, of being seen, of being alive, and as she stood by the window, watching the rain return, she whispered to herself, "Maybe that's enough." She didn't know it yet, but this gentle connection was about to test everything she thought she understood about love, loyalty, and her own heart. The air in Claire's house had started to feel lighter. The quiet that once felt heavy now carried a soft rhythm. Footsteps, laughter, conversation. Ethan's visits had become part of her routine, something she didn't plan but always looked forward to. Each time he showed up, her day felt brighter. But good things, she would soon learn, never stay unnoticed for long. It was a Wednesday afternoon when everything changed. The rain had stopped and sunlight poured gently through the kitchen window. Claire was fixing a loose cabinet hinge when she heard Ethan knock. "Come in," she called, smiling without thinking. He stepped inside, sleeves rolled up, carrying his usual easy warmth. The delivery van broke down the street, he said, setting a small box on the table. "I thought I'd walk the rest of the way." "Shh," she laughed. "You'll do anything to make your deliveries, won't you?" He grinned. "It's not work when the company's good." She didn't answer, but her cheeks warmed. They spent the next few minutes laughing and chatting while he helped her tighten the cabinet screw that had been bothering her for weeks. It was ordinary, yet it felt extraordinary. For once, she wasn't just a wife or a mother or someone waiting for a phone call. She was seen, but then the sound of a door unlocking broke the calm. Claire froze. She wasn't expecting anyone. Robert's voice called from the hallway, "Claire, you home." Her heart dropped. Robert wasn't supposed to be back until Friday. She turned to Ethan, panic flashing across her face. "It's my husband," she whispered, before she could say more. Robert appeared in the doorway, suitcase in hand, his eyes immediately catching sight of the young man standing beside his wife. For a moment, no one spoke. The air turned thick. Robert's jaw tightened. "Didn't know we had company," he said slowly. Ethan straightened, respectful but uneasy. "Just helping with a repair, sir. Delivery issue, that's all." Robert's gaze lingered on him, then shifted to Claire. His tone was calm but cold. "Nice of you to help my wife." Ethan nodded quickly. "I should go. Sorry for the trouble." He grabbed his jacket and left with quiet footsteps. The silence he left behind was deafening. Claire stood still, her hands trembling slightly. "It's not what it looked like," she said quietly. Robert placed his suitcase down. "And what did it look like, Claire?" She sighed. "He's just a delivery man. We talk sometimes. That's all." Robert chuckled bitterly. "You talk. Since when do you need someone else to talk to?" His words stung. Not because they were harsh, but because there was truth buried inside them. For years, they had lived side by side without really talking. She wanted to defend herself, but something inside her broke open instead. "I'm lonely, Robert," she said softly. "I've been lonely for a long time. And not because of him, because of us." He looked at her, stunned. "Lonely. You have everything you need here." "No," she whispered. "I have a house, not a home. You're never here. When you are, it's like you're somewhere else. I've tried to be the good wife, the patient one, but I feel invisible in my own life. Okay. Robert rubbed his forehead, frustrated. So what? You find some young guy to make you feel better? Her eyes filled with tears. No, he just noticed me. That's all. He saw that I existed. Robert turned away, silent. The distance between them, built over years of unspoken resentment and neglect, had never felt wider. That night, they ate dinner in silence. The air was heavy with things unsaid. Claire kept replaying the afternoon in her mind. Ethan's kindness, Robert's stare, the guilt in her heart. She hadn't done anything wrong. Yet she felt as though she had betrayed something sacred. After dinner, Robert finally spoke. Do you want me to stop traveling? She hesitated. That's not what I'm asking. Then what are you asking, Claire? She looked at him with tired eyes. I want you to care again. Not out of guilt or habit. I want you to see me the way you used to. For the first time in years, Robert didn't have a response. He looked away, his pride cracking under the weight of her words. Later that night, Claire sat alone in the living room. The rain began again, soft and steady. She thought about Ethan, how his presence had reminded her of the woman she used to be, someone full of hope and laughter. But she also knew that whatever they had shared couldn't continue. It had crossed into dangerous territory, even if only emotionally, the next day. She didn't expect him to come by, and he didn't. The street felt emptier than usual. She wanted to reach out, to thank him, to explain. But what would she say? That he had unknowingly become the light in her dark days. That he made her see her life clearly, even if it hurt. As the days passed, the silence between her and Robert began to shift. Not all at once, but slowly. He started eating breakfast with her again, asking small questions, showing interest. It wasn't perfect, but it was something. Maybe he realized what he'd almost lost, not because of another man, but because of his absence. One evening, as they sat watching TV, Robert turned to her and said, I didn't know you were that unhappy. Claire gave a faint smile. I didn't either. Not until someone reminded me what happiness feels like. He nodded, understanding more than she expected. They didn't talk about Ethan again, Kay, but his name lingered between them like an echo of what had almost happened. In the following week, Claire returned to painting, spending less time waiting for knocks on the door and more time rediscovering herself. But every time she heard a delivery van drive by, her heart still skipped for a moment, a quiet memory of something that had touched her soul deeply. Yet gently, she knew now that Ethan had not entered her life to stay, but to awaken something that had long been asleep. His kindness had been a mirror, showing her not just her loneliness, but her strength, her desire to live fully again. Still, one afternoon, as she was painting by the window, she saw his truck pass by. Their eyes met for just a second through the glass. He smiled, that same calm, warm smile that had once changed her mornings. She smiled back, not with longing, but gratitude. Then he drove away, and she didn't cry this time. That night, when Robert came home, he noticed her painting, bright colors, open skies, and light everywhere. That's new, he said softly. It's how I feel, she replied. For the first time in years, they sat together, really talking. About life, about what they'd both forgotten to nurture. It wasn't easy, and it wouldn't be fixed overnight. But something inside them had shifted. Claire knew the road ahead wouldn't be perfect, but it would be honest. She had faced the truth about her loneliness, her choices, her heart. And while she would always remember Ethan, she also understood his purpose. Sometimes people enter our lives not to stay, but to remind us what we've lost and what we can still find again. As she turned off the lights that night, Claire whispered a quiet thank you into the dark, not for love that never was, but for the lesson that changed her life forever. The days that followed were quieter, filled with an odd mix of peace and ache. Claire had not seen Ethan since that uncomfortable afternoon when Robert came home early. The house felt still again, but not the same kind of stillness as before. This one carried a strange awareness of what had happened, of what had changed inside her. She tried to focus on her painting, on her garden, on the small things that once filled her time. but every now and then she would catch herself glancing at the window, half expecting to see that familiar delivery truck stop by her gate. A week passed before she saw anything from him again. It wasn't a visit this time. It was a letter. The envelope was plain, tucked neatly between her morning mail. When she saw his handwriting, her heart tightened. She opened it carefully, her hands trembling slightly. "Dear Claire, thank you for your kindness. You made my days brighter in ways you'll never fully know. I got a new job in Seattle. It's a good opportunity, and I think it's time for a new start. You once told me that small kindness can change a person's world. You did that for me. Please take care of yourself. Keep painting, keep smiling. You deserve to be happy. Ethan." Claire read the letter twice. The words were simple, but they carried a weight that made her eyes sting. She pressed the paper to her chest and closed her eyes. There was no anger, no confusion, only a quiet sadness mixed with gratitude. He hadn't said goodbye in person, and maybe that was for the best. Some connections are meant to leave gently, like a season passing. That evening, she sat by the window, looking out at the street where he used to park. The rain had returned, tapping softly against the glass. For a moment, she imagined hearing his knock again, that calm, steady rhythm that once brought warmth into her empty mornings. But this time, there was only silence. And strangely, she felt at peace with it. Over the next few weeks, Claire began to rebuild her days with a new kind of purpose. She joined a local art group, something she'd always been too shy to do. Her paintings became brighter, full of color and movement. When her daughter visited one weekend, she noticed the change immediately. "Mom, you look different," she said, smiling, happier. Claire laughed softly. "Maybe I've finally remembered how to live again." Her daughter hugged her, and for the first time in years, Claire didn't hide her emotions. She realized she didn't have to be strong all the time. Vulnerability, she now understood, wasn't weakness. It was proof of being alive. Robert, meanwhile, had started to change too. Their argument had left a mark on him. For years, he had assumed that being a good husband meant providing, but not necessarily being present. Now he was learning that presence mattered more than success. He began joining Claire for dinner, asking about her paintings, her day, her thoughts. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. One evening, as they sat together on the porch watching the sunset, he said quietly, "I'm sorry I didn't notice how lonely you were." Claire looked at him gently. "We both stopped noticing things, Robert. Maybe we just forgot how to look." He nodded, and in that silence, something between them began to heal. Not completely, but enough to start over. Months passed, and the memory of Ethan began to fade like an old photograph. Not forgotten, but softened. Sometimes when Claire painted, she would think of his words, "You deserve to be happy." She kept his letter tucked safely in a drawer, not as a secret, but as a reminder of what she had learned, that sometimes the people who touch your heart the deepest are the ones who were never meant to stay. Her art flourished. She painted landscapes filled with open skies and light. Each color felt like a piece of her soul coming back to life. One of her paintings was even featured in a small local gallery. Standing there, surrounded by people admiring her work, she felt proud not just of the art, but of the journey that had brought her back to herself. Later that night, as she walked home from the gallery, she passed by a delivery truck parked near a cafe. For a split second, her heart leaped, but it wasn't him. Still, she smiled. She didn't need it to be. The lesson he gave her was already part of who she was. When she reached home, Robert was waiting for her with flowers. "For the artist," he said shyly. She laughed, taking them. "You're learning," she teased. "Maybe I finally am." He replied with a small grin. They sat together, the air between them lighter than it had been in years. It wasn't a fairy tale, but it was real. That was enough. One night, while cleaning her desk, Claire found Ethan's letter again. She unfolded it carefully, the edges now soft from time. She read the words once more, then placed it back in the drawer, smiling. Thank you, she whispered into the quiet room. Not long after, she decided to start a small online blog where she shared her art and short reflections about life. She titled it The Second Bloom. Her first post read, "Sometimes the right people enter your life, not to stay, but to wake you up. They remind you that your heart can still feel, your soul can still grow, and your life can still change, no matter your age." The post received hundreds of kind comments from strangers who said her words had touched them, Claire realized. She wasn't alone. There were many others who had felt unseen, unloved, or forgotten, just like she once had. In time, her story became less about loss and more about transformation. Ethan had been a brief chapter, but the story was always hers. His kindness had given her the courage to rebuild her world, to rediscover herself, and to reopen her heart, first to her own life and then to the love she had once thought was gone. One quiet afternoon, as the light streamed through her window, Claire stood in her garden, the same garden Ethan once admired. The flowers were blooming wildly, their colors rich and full. She closed her eyes, feeling the soft wind brush her face. There was no longing now, only gratitude. Life, she realized, doesn't always give you the love you expect. Sometimes it gives you the one you need, the one that teaches, heals, and reminds you that your story isn't over. And as she turned back toward her house, she whispered to herself, "He helped me find my way home." From that day on, Claire never waited for another knock on the door. She had already received the most important one, the kind that opened her heart to life again.